DJT, which sounds like a product from Monsanto, but in fact was the 45th president, said that he intended to indemnify all police throughout the United States if he's elected president. Whatever the legal difficulties he would have in accomplishing this, the clear fact is that to the extent that a president would be attempting to do such a thing, it would be made more possible and more effective from his point of view that the police are armed to the teeth with United States military surplus from the wars it's recently been engaged in. There are tanks and bazookas and anti-personnel weapons and various weapons of war, long rifles and machine guns and grenades and tactical units. There's a case that Keith Olbermann mentions of a small town in Indiana which purchased a vehicle that is impervious to landmines. What does all this mean? What it means is the United States is vomiting upon itself the efforts of war and the military operations of the United States, the so-called military-industrial complex. In that, the country has produced so many weapons and has produced so many people who have used those weapons, and has produced so many so many people who are inured to the idea of using these weapons, and the glorification of this violence in movies over the decades. It's as though we're going to pay a terrible price for these sins of simply not having demobilized in 1945. In 1941, at the end of 1941, so almost 1942, December 7th, 1941, the United States suffered the attack at Pearl Harbor. The United States militarily was not a global power on December 7th, 1941. It raced into production. My mother worked in a factory in Long Island that produced a part that went onto a bomber. I guess it was the B-17. So the United States found itself on a war footing on December 8th, 1941. And we never stopped. We never turned the switch off. We never said, the war is now over, and now we begin the struggle for peace. And of course, while all this was going on, I was born in 1957, right? 12 years after the war. Japan was prohibited from having an army. Their economy boomed throughout the 60s and 70s and 80s. Germany was prohibited from having an army, and they produced the best cars, the best stereo equipment. And the United States economically started to decline industrially. And it became our business to produce weapons of war and then find places in the world where we could use them and test them and exert what the people were told was power. But what was this power? This power was the ability to do business in the United States and maintain a stability in its sphere of influence, which was enforced by United States military power. And while this was going on, all during my lifetime, the population of the police in the United States kept growing, and the number of police bodies continued to grow. Now, I'm not a historian and I'm not a political scientist and I don't have charts, but we know that there's the Department of Homeland Security and that there's the ATF, which is Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and there's the Drug Enforcement Administration, and there's the FBI, and there's the CIA, and there's the I don't know, whatever you want to name. You have the state police, and you have the local police, and you have the National Guard, and it just goes on and on. And I don't even know how many police we have in the United States today, but it's probably in the neighborhood of 2 million. Now, if it's 2 million, that represents a political faction. And if there is no gun control and you have the militias, you have to ask yourself how many people in the United States, in the event of some civil disturbance, have weapons of war in their homes that they can grab and go to the streets with. And this is our problem. It's one thing to talk about, Trump openly talking about a fascist exertion of power and eroding of democratic principles and of individual rights. As terrifying as that is, consider this. The means every day, every month that has passed during my lifetime, the means for this to be accomplished have increased, have amplified, have been augmented by the availability of military materiel in police departments. So it's not just that citizens should not have the right to have weapons of war. Citizens shouldn't have anything except hunting arms. Police need to be disarmed as well. We all need to be disarmed. After all, it is an extremely agreeable term if you meet someone who is called disarming.